Hello, everyone. As Ross mentioned, my name is Alan. I am based in Bellingham, Washington, which is on the land of the Lummi and Nooksack people. If you're curious about all of the land acknowledgements you've been hearing at the conference today, I did a presentation about this, about mapping native lands at the last NACIS, so you can go check out the video from that. Today, I'm going to be talking about a map we did at Stamen Design, working with mobility data, tracking the impacts of stay-at-home orders during the era of COVID. The slides are there down at the bottom. There's a short link. And I'll probably be adding like a transcript and additional notes to this slide deck later on. So we were working with a group called the COVID-19 Mobility Data Network. So it's a group of researchers who are collaborating with the Facebook Data for Good group. Basically, they're using anonymized and aggregated data from Facebook users, where we're able to tell when people are moving around in their home area, where they're traveling from place to place, who is staying home, and kind of on average, are the people in an area mostly staying home, or are they moving around more than before COVID? All of this data is on the map now. You can view it at this link. I'm not going to try to do any live demos, so you can explore this link right now whenever you choose. The data we were getting, the raw data, is basically time series data for a bunch of different levels of administrative districts. So we had states, we had county level data. Later on, we got international data. I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But you could also, before even putting it on a map, you can chart these as small multiples and look at the different charts. On the left is the percentage of the relative change in mobility. So a deeper dip in those blue charts on the left shows places where people were staying at home more than average. And on the right is more raw data of just maybe some states people move around in general more than they do in some other states. So those are the two metrics we basically were working with to put on a map. And this group of researchers were collaborating with government officials and health officials. So the governor's COVID press conferences in California, they loved these time series charts. They use them all the time. So we were working with the same team that was using these charts, and they basically wanted an interactive version for the public that had maps in it. And what we ended up with, the very first version, just for the US only, looked like this. And I want to emphasize, this is like a super rapid project. Like, they contacted us, I believe, at the end of March, beginning of April, and we had this map launched within a matter of weeks, and then did subsequent improvements over the summer. But even for Stamen, that's like an incredibly fast project, just trying to get this out as quickly as possible so people can use it. And I should say that this version 1, RIP, we put a lot of time. I really loved this map projection that we built. I'm going to talk a lot about that. And then as soon as we made the jump to starting to pull in international data for other countries, we had to put this poor map projection to bed. But we'll talk about it a bunch at the beginning because I wanted to have it stay in the sun here. The thing that was interesting with the data we originally got is not only did we have states, but we had every US territory, including Puerto Rico, but also things like American Samoa, Guam. And I couldn't actually find an off-the-shelf map projection that would include these territories. There are some now that you can use that have Puerto Rico in them, but I didn't find any that had these other territories. It got me starting to think about, is there a conspiracy to make it so that we no longer, or we don't ever see these territories on our default maps? There's a whole book that's now on my reading list that a lot of people referred to me while I was working on this, How to Hide an Empire. Basically, the US is still, in many ways, an empire. We still have territories, we still have colonies all across the world, and we hide them on our maps. Really, I would love to hear a good argument for why these are not all states. So before we get into like how we actually made a map projection that included those territories, I want to talk a little bit about just making any kind of map that is online that is not Mercator. We've done this quite a bit. It looks like, looking through my notes of when I had done projects like this before, when we've done this at Stamen, we're doing a ton of them around 2015, 2016. The first one I think we did was this one on the upper left for a site that's still working, oceanplanning.org. We did a map showing territorial claims into the ocean areas for the US and Canada. Did it for the Audubon Society, there's maps in the upper right. We made an online version of a Nat Geo Amazonia map in the bottom right. There's a link to a PCD talk I gave actually with Seth Fitzsimmons in 2015. Went over a lot of this. This was during the era of tile mill and leaflet. And really, what we had to do was use command line tools. Ogre to Ogre is the one I used quite a bit at the time, to reproject the files such that you end up with the wrong coordinates in your data, so that a tiled map using the normal web Mercator tile puts it into your desired map projection. So we're basically lying to leaflet, we would call it. And here's just an example. I'm not going to go into detail of any of these code snippets really, but taking a GeoJSON file, there's a bunch of things we're doing on the command line, telling it what projection we think it is, what we want it to be, and ending up with a projected GeoJSON file that works how we want it to work. We also did this quite a bit using a different tool, using PostGIS, which in many cases we were using hosted on Carto. We did these maps of American history where we also used a non-Mercator map projection. And to do this in Carto, it's again a totally different way you do it. You could do it with the spatial query where we're doing a transform. We're setting the spatial reference. We're doing another transform. It's kind of this crazy nested functions to, again, get the wrong coordinates that show up in the right spot for our desired projection. The one thing I used for this project, though, was something called Dirty Reprojectors, which I had never used before. And it seems to make a lot of these things a little bit easier, a little bit less awkward. The cool thing that Dirty Reprojectors uses is that it's using D3 libraries under the hood. So it has all kinds of other map projections that are harder to use in these other tools. And it's also really good at composite map projections. So I referred a lot to the tutorial by Lo Beneshu. They did this for Mapbox, election maps, and they have this great tutorial about how to use Dirty Reprojectors. And Lo also added Puerto Rico to their projection. So I just looked at how they did it, and I'm going to figure out how to add my own altered map projection to get the other territories in there. I had 3 different ideas for where to stick them. I kind of wanted to maybe put them all in the lower right, where we already had Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands. Maybe they should be on top of Puerto Rico, maybe they should be underneath. Or maybe they should actually be over on the left side of the map since they are in the Pacific Ocean. I couldn't decide, so I put a poll on Twitter, wanted to see what the cartographers out there thought. If you're looking at this at home, hopefully you're going to make a guess which one you think they picked. Yes, everyone wanted the one where they're in the Pacific in the lower left. This map projection is now, we've got a GitHub repo for it. You can use it as an NPM module, and you can use this in your own projections. So one of the things that you have to do when you are making your own map projection in any of these tiled web maps is that you no longer can use any existing base map. You can't use any other labels, any background layers. You have to do all of that yourself. There's a good side to that too, meaning that you get to put a lot of thought into every label that you're going to put on the map, how you handle them when you display them. I encourage you to play around with the map, look how the labels work. We really like how, especially you can see in the lower right, that you only get county labels for the currently selected state. When you've selected a state and it switches from a corplet of the whole state to its counties, you don't get any distracting neighboring counties that are not relevant, that are not part of your active corplet. We really like how that works. And Mamata Akela, NACIS VP right now, has helped a lot with this stuff too. To build all of these map projections and multiple layers, get them all uploaded to Mapbox, I used a lot of Makefiles. Again, here's a link to a PCD presentation in 2016. I learned so much of this stuff from Seth back in the day. And it's all about how to project your data, how to merge different data sources together, how to reformat your fields, and then to be able to just press a button and redo that again without having to do any of these manual steps if you want to make a change somewhere in that pipeline. I'm not going to go into any of the details here, just showing some of the ideas of what are the different types of things. Like if you've learned command line tools, Ogre to Ogre being a huge one, MapShaper, Tippecanoe, once you get comfortable with those on the command line, start to learn how to put those into a Makefile, and you can then run a single command that will run multiple files. It can take the outputs of one of your previous steps, put them into the new step. A lot of what's going on in these snippets is reprojecting things, extracting only the countries that I needed, reformatting the fields so that I can merge files together, and uploading things to Mapbox at the end. And after all that work to make that great map projection, then we knew this was going to happen, and we were excited for the data. When it arrived, we had data then for 15 countries across the world. So now this is the version of the map you'll see live on the site. Again, we had already built this whole pipeline for making our own custom map projections. So it seemed like a total shame to then say, well, we're making a world map now, let's go back to Mercator. Since we were already able to make everything, all of our base map layers that we needed, we said, well, we can pick any other map projection we choose. And the people have spoken and they preferred NACIS favorite, the Patterson projection. So that's what we use. Again, this is a choropleth map. It's not an equal area projection. We know that. We can talk about that in the virtual hallway afterward. I think it's okay to have a rectangular projection here that's somewhat equal area, but not fully. One of the last things that was kind of irritating, a challenge, was having the data that was being analyzed from movement data was actually in different spatial units for different countries. So for the US, they were aggregated using FIPS codes for counties and state identifiers. For European countries, they were using something called NUTS, which is a French acronym for different statistical units in the EU and neighboring countries. And then for outside of Europe, they're using GADM. And of course, we really enjoyed throwing around the double meanings of NUTS and mispronouncing GADM all the time when this is frustrating, trying to get these different data sets to join together. In the end, I think we even gave up using NUTS and were able to convince the data analysis team to start producing data for GADM, so we only had to mix 2 data sets. So the end result now looks like this. You've got the map of the world. We have linked data visualizations where you can click on any part of the bar charts. You can click on the line chart. You can click on the map, and it'll highlight in all the different places. And I encourage you to look around, see kind of things you've maybe seen in the news. So like we can look at Australia, where COVID was almost completely gone in Australia, except that they suddenly had an outbreak in the Victoria state and where Melbourne is. And now we can see on the chart how Victoria has locked down quite severely compared to all the other states in Australia. You can see things where it looks like in Peru, they have a lockdown every Sunday. And some of the regions in Peru, they seemed like they had maybe a block of time in July where they weren't locking down, and they did again. You can also see things unrelated to COVID. So looking at the data for Oregon, if you look at the bottom of the time series, the bottom right, you can see starting in the middle of September, suddenly the mobility dropped dramatically because of the wildfire smoke. People were staying at home because it was just unsafe to go out, and we can see that in our charts. It's really interesting. So yeah, go look around, see what patterns you can see in the data. Send us links. All of the URLs, when you interact with the map, will update. So if you click on India and you set the time slider to a certain point, you can share that link to anyone else. This kind of deep linking is something we try to build into all of our apps. And that's about it. I have a bunch of fun things, some fun slides at the end. In Stamen Slack, we have an exhaust channel for when things go wrong or when things look weird. We post a lot of good stuff there, and it seemed like there was a ton actually that came out of this project. So look at the slides, dig into it. I encourage everybody to do that, to collect errors, mistakes, fun things that happen in the way while you're making a map. We found with our team at Stamen now that everyone's working at home, it's actually kind of a good way to have that feeling you're looking over people's shoulders as they're working on their work and having some more unfinished projects that you can kind of see and comment on.